Hey, it's Stephanie,
And Kristy.
and welcome back to another parent teacher conference where we believe that conversations about our kids shouldn't just happen once or twice a year. There should be an ongoing dialogue.
AI's fast and forceful invasion into schools is a topic that we have spoken about at length this year. Still, so many questions remain. As the attention economy remains a finite and valuable resource, parents, educators, and even school administrators continue to grapple with the reach of EdTech. While some stakeholders are fed up with the volume of screen time students are subjected to, others believe that AI and all of its offerings will provide the necessary solutions to a system under strain. But what does this mean for the future of schools? How will cognitive offloading and frictionless learning impact a generation of students? How will the intrinsic bias coded into mankind's digital footprint shape the future of ethical reasoning? How might this new innovation deepen existing inequalities in education? What policies should we look to protect the human-centered values that are foundational to public education? To help us explore some of these vital and big questions, we've asked Anthony Carabache to join us today in the conference.
Anthony brings a well rounded and versatile perspective to our conversation today. Rooted in hands on teaching experience, he has served as a professional development instructor focusing on best practices for integrating technology in the classroom, alongside experience writing training materials and policy. And his passion for the intentional use of technology is evident in everything he writes. As a staff officer in the professional development department for the Ontario English Catholic Teachers Association and as a member of the IPC Strategic Advisory Council, he brings a wealth of experience with hard and critical conversations in education. Having the opportunity to be immersed in these various roles, he has a keen awareness of the interests of various stakeholders, students, teachers, administrators, policymakers, and educational leaders alike. Anthony, we warmly welcome you here today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be a part of this.
So, Anthony, to start us off, would you care to share a little bit about your work experience in the EdTech space? So, what are the various roles that you've held over the years?
I think long before I even became a teacher, I was always interested in the use of technology in education. You may not know that I was an education assistant in Toronto before I became a teacher, and I was tasked with assisting a student who had been diagnosed with autism. And the communication gap was so prevalent that we had to find solutions so that we could bring out the best in this particular child. And somebody said you should try some forms of assistive technology. And that was in 1998 and 1999. And I think once I got hang of this idea that technology could level a playing field, I became addicted. And since then, of course, I went back to Teachers College, completed that degree, and entered the classroom ready to experiment in the early 2000s with whatever technology was available. So for the first 8 years or so, we were blogging, we were recording, we were flipping classrooms, and it was really exciting. And we did that alongside the establishment of social media like Facebook. And so alongside the academic pursuits, there was also this social, all of these changes in our social fabric. And as a teacher in the 2000s and anyone who was teaching in 2000s, all of a sudden we had to learn how to manage what students were doing in this alternate universe in the online world. And that started the journey for me around socialization and what happens to us when we are exposed to a world that is a lot like the Wild West. It's not regulated and without rules or safety. So there was always a tug of war for me between how to use this technology for good and then who's talking about the safety aspect as we expose our students and ourselves to this. So without getting into too much detail, I then applied to become a resource teacher or a consultant for the Toronto Catholic School Board for technology integration. And they said yes, their mistake. And I did 6 years of that. We won national awards for some of the initiatives that we did in terms of how we integrate technology. And slowly, as time passed, I became acquainted with the union. I could not believe that the union was offering courses on integration of technology. And the first meeting that I attended, they had a corporate representative training teachers about the use of technology. And I walked out. And then at the time, the director of the program came out and said, "Why are you leaving?" I said, I will never take advice from somebody in the corporate sector about how to teach my students. So when you get a teacher in here to tell me how to do it, I'll be happy to stay. And she said, "Well, why don't you do it?" And that became my relationship solidified with OECTA. I then wrote their courses in terms of technology and integration in the classroom. And now I find myself working permanently in the department there, looking at technology in the classroom. So that's how I got here.
What an incredible story. And I love that the roots of your teaching career are focused in communication gaps and building and focused on equity. And it's really interesting that those tender experiences working one-on-one with a student, I can anticipate that that's probably what drives a lot of your current work with technology and helping teachers, right? Using technology as a piece to facilitate communication, to ensure people have equitable experiences, to ensure that they have rich and robust experiences. So thank you for sharing that beautiful journey. And in there, I did get little inklings of why you do the work, but maybe you can just dive into that question a little bit more. What's your personal why for the work that you do?
It's a good question. There has to be a voice of reason, and without always being the antithesis of every argument. I'm a big believer in balance. And when I sense imbalance in the way we do things as a profession, first and foremost, as humans, and in our case as Catholic teachers, my alarm bells ring. And so, like I was explaining in my introduction, that tug of war between progress and safety as something I've been writing about for a very long time. And now being incorporated into an organization that's dedicated to the protection of its members, it only makes sense to me that there has to always be somebody in the room to say, just a second, we don't have to abandon safety in the name of progress. And so, yes, of course, I will always defend the child and always maintain that it's our duty and our calling to do that. But in my role now, it's morphed into it's the same idea but applied to adults. Because as teachers in Ontario and in Canada and around the world, we're often called lifelong learners, but we're never given all of the benefits of being a lifelong learner. So my position is whatever we do, we have to allow people to learn, to make mistakes, and they can't be harmed while they're doing that. And technology and the progress right now is driven by a single voice, and it often touts innovation, and it rarely, if ever, talks about safety for its users. And so that's my mission, and that's what drives me.
Anthony, I just want to say that it's so inspiring to hear that stance taken in a world where corporate interests in pedagogical practice have become so muddied and intertwined. It's inspiring to hear. And I think as Stephanie and I have been having these conversations over the past year, it's really interesting to hear the legacy of other educators in terms of the entry point through where tech or the different iterations of social media really shaped their practice, right, for better or for worse. I'm wondering where your own ongoing education around tech comes from, if not from the companies that are so aggressively putting those resources out there. How do you continue to draw that line, given that they seem to be kind of driving the available resources around new products, applications to the classroom, and so on?
So the best way to be informed is, of course, you've got to read the research. The problem with the research field in terms of artificial intelligence, for example, is that they will admit that they're not moving quickly enough to provide us with that information. So my alternative then is to test, and I do test profusely. So I've been working with artificial intelligence in particular since 2021. And I was fortunate enough to be a beta tester for OpenAI's ChatGPT when it was still starting to come out. And so I have the time to do that. Like my employer, my chief of operations has said to me, we can carve out space for you. That's not a very fair comparison to everybody else in the field. So you have your own responsibilities every day. You can't be expected to do research and to read and then to test these products that are coming at you. And private corporations bank on that. They bank on quick adoption and slick sales in order to get into the classroom because, obviously public taxpayer dollars spend just like private dollars do. So that really is it in a nutshell. I've done a tremendous amount of research. I'm very blessed that I've been connected with like-minded people around the province, around the world. And as you know, in this world, if you build a network, it grows organically. So all of the connections that one makes throughout their journey, you keep the ones that are valuable and you shed the ones that maybe aren't so valuable. And I can tell you now on this podcast that all of that work over the last 5 years has culminated for me into the writing of a book. I have completed that book and have actually donated it to OECTA, Catholic Teachers Association, so that they can distribute it to teachers. And we are hoping to have that published and distributed in early fall.
That's incredible.
Yeah, that just, it's kind of taken my breath away to think about that, how much, I guess the point for me that really landed is that you have time, or you had time and someone invested in you to critically understand the use of AI and understand the implications that it has on you as a person, but also in the teaching space. And as you mentioned, there isn't a lot of investment of time for others to come to that same understanding. And just to go back to that point of when you talked about, why you're here, your personal why, a balance between progress and safety. And I can see that so much coming through so much in how you're describing your interactions and your education with AI. So thank you for that work that you're doing. It's wonderful. When has that principle been greatly tested, for example? Like when have you really felt that tension of progress and safety really, really at the opposite ends in your experience learning about it and navigating the AI space?
So I think in 2022, 2023, I had been testing ChatGPT in particular and Anthropic's Claude. I don't think it was Claude at the time, but I was testing what we call the frontier AI. So the big three are Anthropic, who owns Claude, ChatGPT, who's owned by OpenAI, and Copilot. It was there at the time, but it was really ChatGPT. And as I was getting deeper into the testing, I was starting to realize that there was this hidden entity that wasn't being objective and it wasn't being accurate. And I think at that point, the alarm bells started to ring. And then on the other side, it became so good at conversing with confidence, then the alarm bells really started to ring. Because Stephanie, in the last 23 years of doing what I'm doing, I've come to understand how we as a profession or as humans change. And in terms of how I've done a lot of research on how marketing affects decisions. And so when something is as confident and as convincing as ChatGPT was 3 or 4 years ago, that started to really draw my attention to, there could be something brewing here. Like there could be a problem. And so I embarked on a study of economics, and that's when I really became alarmed, because once you pit safety against economics, you're never going to win. And once the companies at large that are really investing in the frontier developers started to show just how much money they were investing, it was only a matter of time before profit became far more important than ethics and safety. And at the time, there were hearings that were going on between whistleblowers. Whistleblowers were at Congress Frances Haugen would be one of a very famous whistleblower who is really telling the tales of what Facebook was doing behind the scenes in terms of how it was using the algorithm to manipulate its users. And then, all these other developments are going on. It just clicked for me in terms of a lot of money is being poured in. There's way too much money for this to fail. And we as public servants we're left with no means of defense. And yet we are the ones who are responsible for the protection of our students' safety. So that's everything. It was really in 2023 that I started to write a lot about all of this. I wrote a report for my executive just to give them a baseline understanding of what was coming and what its potential effects could be on the profession. I don't know. I hope that answers your question.
No, it definitely answers my question. But when you're there figuring out just how powerful this tool is, where does your mind go? Why were there alarm bells going off? What were you imagining if put into the hands of, X, Y, and Z, what could happen? So just was curious about that.
Sure. So for sure, humans have a tendency to take paths that are generally a lot more convenient. And so when you think about how easy it is to prompt a chatbot to create something for you, and you add the system under strain that Kristy referred to in the introduction, like our system and most education systems around the world, not all, are under a tremendous amount of strain. And when you present somebody who is in distress with a path out, they'll take it. It's human nature. It's something we observe all the time. And it's not an indictment on who we are, but it's just programmed for us that if we're presented with a path of lesser resistance, then we often take it. And so when those prompts were producing what I saw as teacher work potentially, like the planning and or the evaluation of students, and this was 3 or 4 years back, I thought, if this gets out and teachers are presented with this as a solution to the workload, we're going to be in trouble. We're going to lose the very things that make us who we are. And no sooner did I write about that, pilot projects popped up in the United Kingdom and in the United States where they started to run schools that did not have teachers delivering educational content. So my concern, first and foremost, is for our safety, is for us understanding how to apply it ethically. But really, that's kind of secondary. I know I just said it was first and foremost, but it's really, if I look at it as a teacher, I don't want teachers 5 years down the road to lose their jobs because they took this path. So I argue that the trajectory that we're on is dangerous for us in terms of our job security, but also in terms of our skills and how we keep those skills. I think you also mentioned cognitive offloading, frictionless learning. Those are concepts that are super important here. And so that's what drives me, Stephanie. In my role right now, I have to help guide the union to protect its members in the face of artificial intelligence. All right. So there's job loss, but then there's also the other risks that you alluded to earlier around equity, around bias that also exists. So we can look at it from an economic perspective, which is around the job itself, but you can also look at it as a safety and ethical issue perspective, because harm could happen to the user.
It's interesting that we have to always ground the consequences in economic repercussions, because this is an economic war, as you kind of mentioned. It's the, big tech putting money in. And so therefore, it's driven by profit and it's hard to fight, right? The only thing that's probably going to get people to kind of stand on their backs and say, hey, I care about this, too, is because it's my job. So we have to talk about job loss. It is a real thing. But for me, when you said it questions what it means to be human, our skills, our talents, our expression of self, that for me is the bigger alarm bell. That's where the crux of the issue is for me here. That idea of what it means to be human. And I've talked about this before, but for you, I want to dive in just one more question about this idea of what does it mean to be human here? When you are looking at this and you're standing face to face, seeing what AI can do, and you're saying, holy, this is really, really challenging who I am as a person. What is that thing that you're talking about there?
Right. So if you boil it down to a fine point, I think you can look at it this way. All of the technology that we use, the prominent technology, is owned and controlled by a very focused few. So it's very clear, it's very easy to name names. You can name all the names you want. You can say Elon Musk, you can say Jeff Bezos, Sundar Pichai, or Sam Altman. The reality that we have to face as human beings is, and especially for those of us that have faith and practice faith, is that are we okay with abandoning our values to adopt someone else's values? These aren't universal values that we're talking about. When we had the ones I'm referring to. These are values constructed by profit-making companies who have their own motives, who are driven by extremely wealthy human beings. And we as public servants can't help. We can't help but be at odds with that, or else we're in trouble. So that's the first major issue, right? When I look at something, I know this product wasn't developed for me. So that's like the first barrier, right? That's like if I'm using ChatGPT to create a lesson plan, you first have to say, this was never designed to do that, number one. And the creators have never set foot in a classroom in my town, period. They've never looked at the, 26, 28 pairs of eyes that are standing in front of me. And so I think we cannot ever abandon that human aspect of that. And so that's the first barrier. The first barrier is values. The second issue is then, well, what makes us human are our flaws. And this entire system, these systems are designed to eliminate flaws. So famous story out of Toronto is when, a few months back, TELUS was filtering its call center voices, removing all accents so that they had no accents, and they were doing that in real time. And so it's a really morbid example of eliminating uniqueness in our society. So that's the other thing. So to err is to be human, right? To struggle and to learn or to hate learning or to love a subject or to flourish, that's all a part of who we are. And if a teacher can't be an example of that struggle, what chance does a child have? And so when we integrate technology that eliminates the struggle, then we eliminate from view that important aspect of what it means to be human. Does that make sense to you?
There's so much resonating and landing, Anthony, with everything that you're saying. It's, in terms of digesting and processing, my brain's going in a million different directions because it's so resonant and powerful and truthful. And there's so much landing for me on the subject of teachers and tools. And I'm sort of running this mental audit of, I started with the system under strain, like where teachers are at, like the burnout, the fatigue, right? And I feel that anxiety around this fast and furious solution or tool that's being introduced in marketing in the way that it is, and what we stand to lose, right, when that's offered to us the way that it is. I've seen some writing on Substack this week about the rollout of Claude for teachers, right? So they've made that very formal foray into that space. And I know that you've written a lot about this idea of AI as a tool and the intentionality with which it's applied in schools. Stephanie and I were hoping to explore today some of the articles that you've written, which caution and point out the direction around the application of that tool. And if I could quote you for a second, you've said, when it comes to AI, teachers need to go in with eyes wide open. You state, The use of a tool is an asymmetric between power and authority, a tool and its user. The user is in complete control and can wield the tool to suit their goals. In terms of the balance of power, AI is powered by technology that uses the user in ways that were never possible before. The argument that AI is a tool is not applicable to the modern field of AI because the balance of power is now in the hands of AI and its creators. Can you say a little bit more about that application and that meaning for us as teachers, Anthony?
Right, 100%. So I'm glad first of all, I'm honored that it's the first time anyone's quoted me, which is really cool. But the marketing machine and folks who claim that they know but haven't really researched how this technology works use the word tool in order to push the product onto the users. So I want you to hear my words. Like that this product was developed on technology which its only goal was to keep the user using. That's it. And I want you to also, I mean, if you use your imagination and think about the terminology I'm using, there's only one other product out there that uses, or one other area of life that uses the words that I'm using, like product and user, and keep the user using. Okay, so if you can connect those dots, but the idea is that all of that technology, all of those really tightly honed algorithms were designed to absorb you, to analyze you, and then to build a model of you online. We all have one, can't avoid it, in order to test a variety of things upon you, right? So mostly sales. They're mostly trying to sell other products, but also as of COVID, at the end of or during COVID, they learned that they could sell ideologies to you. And that model, once they have success on that digital form of who you are, they then expose the real you to it and see how you respond to that. And if you respond favorably, they sell that information to other companies and say, hey, this person might be interested in one of your products or one of your ideologies. That's what this entire product is based upon. It's a massive and powerful prediction tool for all of us. And so this idea that you can use it how you're in control is really silly. You were never in control before the evolution of the algorithm as we know it today. Yeah, we were in control. We got to choose what we wanted to learn about and what we wanted to see. And right now, it's a really good analogy for you is when you do a Google search, you don't get to see what the world is offering you. You only get to see what Gemini is offering you. And don't think for one split second that Gemini is offering you anything objective, right? It is offering you information based on what its coding, its programming, and all the algorithmic training deems that you should see. So this, like, I can't believe when I hear that this is a tool. And we as adults, we might be able to rationalize what I just said. You know, every time I touch the chat, it's trying to figure me out. But you put a child under the age of 16 in that situation, they don't have the same life experience, the wherewithal, the resistance to this tool. And I know we'll probably talk about this later, but this concept of sycophancy is laced throughout all of these so-called tools, which their sole goal is to entice you and to please you and to keep you coming back. That's not the definition of a tool for me. And I don't think scientifically it's a tool is I use the tool to achieve a goal, but there's the consequences of me using that tool I have accepted, but I have also designed. Okay. Whereas in terms of AI, it's absorbing me, it's cataloging me, it's harvesting my information, and it's going to use all of that, or it's going to give it to the company that built it to use all of that to either sell to manipulate me. Manipulation is the name of the game. I know it sounds so sinister, but it's really not. It's been around for a long time. I mean, I grew up in the 80s. We were exposed to very aggressive advertising as children in the 80s. And it's not new. And the use of psychology to manipulate people, that's not new either. And so doing a simple search in 2010 and yielding a result from Wikipedia or from any other source, that was a good use of tools. Using a creative tool through Adobe to enhance my artistic expression, that's the use of the tool. Using a word processor like Word to share my ideas and only my ideas, including my mistakes, that's a tool. But engaging with anything that has artificial intelligence embedded within it, in which it can influence the user, that's not a tool. That's not a tool. That's a relationship, and it's not symmetrical, right? So that's what my research and what my learning has led me to in terms of why it's not a tool.
So I think what you said there is spot on, and you're reminding us about what should happen in educational spaces for us to learn, that there needs to be room for flaw and imperfection, because that is part of the process. And I think that's absolutely, an important ingredient in education. So then, keeping that in mind, what needs to be happening in schools and educational spaces, broadly speaking, in order for AI to be used as a tool in the true sense of the word? Or maybe that question is presuming that you think it should be in education at all. So maybe you can dive into a little bit of that.
Sure, it's a very loaded question. And so in the talks that I do around the province, and it sounds like you've been to a couple, so I never say we shouldn't use it. Because like back to the beginning, I was saying we have to find a balance. The problem that we have right now is that there are no plans. There aren't any meaningful deployment plans in terms of the use of artificial intelligence. I've read on the Catholic side, I think about 22 different school board policies. And some are aspiring to be very good ones. They're still progressing. And many others are just template policies that really have no impact on practice. There is a way to do it, but the first thing that we as educators have to do, and I call folks to do this in the book, is you have to resist this idea that progress can only happen in the absence of safety. That's not true. That's not true. All major industries on the planet are progressing beautifully well with thousands of safety regulations upon them. So innovation, it's lazy innovation when you remove safety. That's lazy. That's the quickest, easiest, cheapest, dirtiest way to put out a product. And the company of OpenAI, their CEO, Sam Altman, has said clearly, yeah, we put stuff out and then we wait and see what damage it causes and then we make the fixes. That's just so wrong. It's so harmful. And so I think boards or any school board authority, any leader who has a decision-making authority should take a step back and ask this very easy question, like, what problem am I trying to solve? Because I haven't gotten an answer to that. If a teacher says to me, the problem I'm trying to solve is I need more time, then my response to them is, at the cost of losing your job? Or should we look at the system and look at how we should be better investing in the system? And so that's where we stand. So safety does not have to be the antithesis of progress. That's a centuries old battle that's why unions exist. That's exactly why unions exist, because somebody needs to step up and say, hey, hold on a second. You can still profit, but you better protect the people that you're supposed to be employing and serving. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing around deployment in the classroom is, if you can answer the question, what do we need it for? What problem is it solving? If you can answer that question, then we have to look at, okay, well, do you have safety training for your teachers first? Because I haven't seen any evidence of that anywhere in the world. where you teach a teacher about the perils of the use of artificial intelligence. You acknowledge that it's going to evolve, but you say, here's where we are now. And you insulate what it means to be a teacher. So if the school board authority is not willing to insulate you, by that I mean there has to be language somewhere, whether you're in a union or you're not. There has to be language in a contract that says the use of this product will not replace your work. And until that is in language, until that's written, we're vulnerable. That's super important. And once that's like the most basic ask. That's like bottom first step. Okay. Then we can move into safety training, and then we can look at deployment that makes sense. And don't believe anything you read or anything you see, because I've been around technology and sellers of technology for 2.5 decades. This is not a revolution or evolution of education. We've heard it all before. And if you've lived through smart boards, if you lived through, Prezi or PowerPoint or Google Docs and Google Classrooms and G Suite, and then, Quizlets and whatever, you name it, it's so cyclical. All they do is market it and say this is the next step in education, but there's no proof in research that technology has actually yielded any better results in student success. There's no proof. It doesn't say that it's a detriment, but it doesn't say that it's a benefit. And so that's also, so that all that fuels the same original question. Okay, why are we doing this?
That's
Why?
a great question. Why are we doing this? And I think, as you were talking, some thoughts that came to mind, your teachers are going to it to replace their work, but if they think that their work can be replaced by this task, then they've lost sight of what their actual job is. And so I think specifically our system has kind of lost sight of the spirit of what teaching is. And it is not the beautiful things that we can create. It's how we can show up and guide students to become who they ought to be. Because there's nothing that I could tell you that you don't already have that's within yourself. And our job, I think, is to spotlight that and remember or remind students that you have everything within you that you need to learn, right? We're meant to facilitate and guide. I had a student once, he would hand in these beautiful submissions, these beautiful this beautiful writing, but I think he lacks self-confidence. His parents were highly successful in, doctors, lawyers, that kind of stream of education, field of work. And I think, maybe because he wasn't getting 100% or 90s, he didn't feel good about his work. I knew he had a lot in there. So sometimes I'd ask him in class, like, what do you think about this topic? What are you trying to, what's your insight? I value what you have to say, because I'd get these beautiful write-ups, but then in class you wouldn't want to share. So he'd say, I don't know. After hearing this for about half the year, a couple students started making fun of him. I don't know, they would say. And in my job there as teacher is to create space for that student to shine, have compassion for the kids who are making fun of him, because they probably say those things to themselves when they don't get things right. So it was gently reminding them about what education was about, and saying, I said, have you ever read this young man's work? I said to the students who were making fun of him, I said, have you ever read or heard his ideas? They're like, no. I go, so can you trust me as teacher to know that he has something great to say? The next time I asked that boy a question a week later, he answered the question, not perfectly, but there was so much good in there that came out from it. And it was my job as teacher to show up for him, but also to show up for the other students who cast judgments, because in that they could see this guy who didn't know he does have good things to say, or maybe I shouldn't be so hard on myself. And so in those moments, like, that's what teaching is. And that boy, I didn't do anything different in my lesson. I didn't make it fancier, wasn't prettier, but I did teach him something, or I did remind him of something that maybe lay dormant within him, that he has the capacity to learn and grow, that what he has to say is valuable, and that judgment or this idea of perfection, or there's no room for flaw, doesn't have a place in our classroom. That to me is like the heart of what teaching is. And then the beautiful subjects, the fancy stuff can come later. But the heart of teaching is that exchange. And, there's so much that I can't even bring justice to the story because it's what was felt in those moments. It was the look on his face, the expression, the change from a sad young man to a boy who showed a little bit more confidence. It was those things that I felt, and that there's really what the spirit of learning is. But if I'm focused on AI, and if that boy, went and said, I gave up and said, I'm going to let the computer do it for me, then, where would he be today? And, it does also remind me about another quote. I think it was an article that you wrote. It says, friction where learning happens. You wrote, the spoon feeding AI is custom tailored in chewable morsels, but it could be blended if you want. It predicts the next word, the next thought, the next step. It fills the silence before we can feel it. It replaces the slow burn of insight with the quick hit of convenience. And with every easy answer it delivers, it risks dulling the instincts we rely on to question, to wonder, to wrestle with complexity. Learning is not the consumption of answers. Learning is the forging of meaning from something we have yet to understand. I love that. I got chills reading that. It is beautiful. It highlights so much of what education ought to be and what it shouldn't be. And so what I particularly love about it is that you're really focusing on this process of learning there. Education shouldn't be about eliminating process or steps or the discomfort needed to learn. So I think that a lot of what is happening in education, there's issues that are happening that already existed before AI came into the scene, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think maybe AI just is kind of amplifying it. And I want to ask you though, do you think then there is space to be grateful for the emergence of AI? Do you think it's going to get us back or it's giving us this reaction to what's happening? Is it the extreme that's needed to generate a collective response to some of the shortcomings already at work in the system?
I can't help but think of Hansel and Gretel. Like, I can't help but think of this trail of, what we think are sweet candy to a stranger's home. And so I'm extremely, extremely leery of saying that we could leverage it. Because right now, if you give anybody who's starved for help anything, they'll take it. And that can't be the right motivation to accept the use of something as potentially dangerous as AI is. So a teacher who struggles to meet the needs of their students is depleted for reasons that we have to address. And so somebody like you who can devote their gaze, you can look directly into your students' hearts and minds and recognize who they are. That requires energy. It requires a degree of tenacity, of protection. You're driven. And all of those things disappear when you're tired. And so in the absence of energy, we will take whatever we can. Doesn't matter if it's good or bad, in order to survive. And so what I'm saying to teachers is this, is that presently in 2026, as we record this is not the time to accept the help from private interests. This is the time where we have to find our energy and make a decision. We either demand better from the system as a communal profession and section a few of us off to demand better from the technology, because there's no doubt in my mind that we must. And we also have to look inwards and say, what do we need to re-energize ourselves on our own? Because we are post-COVID, things that people don't want to talk about. We're still suffering the impact of that pandemic. And so teachers as a profession, we have a mountain to climb in terms of our own self-confidence as a profession, our own energy, our own inspirations. We have to meet the teacher that went into teachers college again and see if we can reignite some of that passion. And then we can, as a unified profession, look at the authorities and say, hey, you're not investing enough and not in the right things so that I can do my job and so that I can protect these students and so that I can see them succeed. So this shiny box that you're handing me, just take it back. So Steph, that's where I really fall. Like I don't think in the tenure that I have left as a teacher, I don't know that I'll see the era in which that blend does happen. I hope to, but I'm certainly invested in the fight. I prefer not to call it a fight. I would like to call it a dialogue. I have been disinvited from many places, just so you know, because people don't want to hear the other side. But there is a narrow pathway. The path is so narrow. It's like the eye through the eye of a needle. But if we continue to talk about this pathway where we balance values and we balance progress, that pathway will widen. It will widen and it will be shored up. It'll be strengthened. But at this time, I don't see evidence of anybody caring about the friction or about distinction and being unique. I don't see evidence of that. I see quick hits and I make those references very specifically, right? We have to resist the easy way out. And all morality is based on that. It doesn't matter what faith you practice, but in my case, in our case, we're Catholic teachers. We have that beautiful faith story that says to us, the easy way is not the right way always. You have to look at other options and you have to work.
I definitely agree with you. I just think that a lot of the things that you were cautioning against existed before AI came into existence. And I don't think you're denying that. Like there's smaller or lesser degrees of what it is, in that I think there was a loss of critical thought through Google answers, or there was the overconsumption of screens, or maybe lack of funding towards, educational spheres, and lack of consistency maybe in, focusing on, experiential learning. And I think a can be a blessing in that now it's moved us further along the scale, and it's highlighting or amplifying some of those problems that might have already existed. And it's now making us, I think, aware of those things that might have existed. So I'm suggesting that this extreme, we can be grateful for it because it's actually asking us to question or reevaluate what teaching ought to be.
I don't disagree with that at all. And education has needed its own revolution since the Industrial Revolution. But here's the difference between now and let's say even 10 years ago. The product that we're using up until 2023 was not capable of replacing our work. This is a huge difference. Okay, so I don't disagree with any of that. And there is a huge band of teachers that are constantly trying to evolve the profession to determine what can we do differently? How can we engage? How do we recapture the magic, etc. But for me, it's pretty clear that we do have a very small window. And by the time that the academics and the researchers and the deep thinkers have come to determine what this is, I believe it could be too late. So the reckoning has to happen a lot more quickly than it has in the past, because the speed with which, and again, back to the economics, we're talking about trillions of dollars invested in this, where you have to also like really capture this idea that it's an arms race. It's an arms race. It really is, right? And so I can't afford to look at the opportunity until in my role, I've secured a pathway to safety. And I guess that's my shortfall, right?
I think what's come up a lot for me too in the last year, something I find myself stuck looking at a lot, and it's really, really loud and resonant this morning talking to you, Anthony, is the disconnect so often between policy and the philosophical conversations that are happening from the outside world about AI's application into education and the practice, like the daily realities for those of us on the front lines. And I think you sort of led with this, that teachers know what is needed in the classrooms. Teachers know what their students need because they're the ones working with them every day. And in your previous explanation, you were talking about a very, I think, intentional sequencing of AI into schools, alignment of that policy and that practice, safety training, then deployment. And the unfortunate reality that we're facing is that it was the exact opposite, right? As per Sam Altman's playbook and everyone else's, mass deployment, experimentation with kids and adults and everyone using it, and then responsive and reactive policies after the fact. And I think in terms of the work and what's required, it's hard. The infiltration is fully alive and well. Every child, every youth in front of a screen in a classroom right now is engaging with it. So we're in a position now where we have to think about how we walk that back, because every day that goes by, every hour spent is further entrenching that sycophantic relationship that you spoke about. So now we're not at a point where we think about how to introduce it. Our challenge is how do we walk it back?
That's a great point. And so that leads to this whole chapter I write about around the concept of inevitability. And so let me give you my background. So, and we got a taste of it at the introduction, but my job was, yes, in title around integration of technology, but it was also change theory and how to make a human being change, right? Asking a teacher to change their practice. So you have to learn a lot about the psychology of change. And what I learned is that when a product is rolled out, it comes tagged with this idea of inevitability. And that's been coming out for a very long time. This is inevitable. This is inevitable. You can't resist it. You can't resist it. Okay, fine. I wouldn't ever say we need to put it back in its box. That's not the point. The point of what we should do should be to say, okay, it's out there. People are using it. Everyone's using it. Let's not be silly about it. But does that then cancel the impetus to educate students about it? Like, I don't, I don't see why if somebody uses something that a month or two later, you can't educate them about this. I mean, we apply this to sexual health. We apply this to our faith. We apply this to just about every single academic study, right? But eventually, you're going to come to a point in time where you should, hopefully, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years down the road, where you don't expose a child to the harm until you've trained them, like driving a car. So it's just there are processes in place in society that have been built over time that say, for example, driving a car is a perfect example. The age of 16 is the appropriate time in terms of cognitive development, maturity, and physical strength to allow a youth to drive a vehicle, which could kill anybody on any given day. Like a car. It's thousands and thousands of pounds hurtling down the road at 60, 70, 80 kilometers per hour. So we as society have developed those processes and put them in place, and they seem to be working. So there is a transition period that we're in right now where, we always say the horses are out of the barn and you can't bring them back. I get that. But why can't we still educate people about it? Why can't we grant them an aha moment? Because when people attend some of these sessions and they go, "Oh my goodness, I didn't know." Well, now you know. So there's still help, but the marketers use slick talk like inevitability so that you just give up and you don't contribute to the conversation. You accept it. And, it shouldn't be a characteristic of a teacher, at least here in Ontario. A teacher here in Ontario should be modeling that critical thought and to demand better because we deserve better. And if we deserve better, then by association, our students are going to get better. So that's that's the tug of war that we're always talking about, Kristy. Like, we should never just throw up our hands and say, this is it. It's coming. What are you going to do? We have to fight that temptation.
Thank you for that, Anthony. And I think your passion and your protective drivers are so resonant in the work that you've told us about so far. I'd love to pivot. This is a personal interest of mine that I'm really excited to talk about with you. Your work with the Information and Privacy Commission Advisory Council. It's led to the development of the Digital Privacy Charter for Ontario schools. So you're having your hands in some pretty important, I think, legislative decisions that way when it comes to these big existential questions about privacy and safety and the application of these technologies in schools. I know that the work outlined 12 commitments that Ontario schools can adopt to enhance support for young people in this digital environment. Can you walk us through your role on that council and the document that you've put out advising Ontario schools? What do teachers, parents, families need to know about it?
Okay, so the first thing I want to be sure to clarify is that it's the staff at the Privacy Commissioner, the Information Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, that really are the ones responsible for all of this incredible work. And the commissioner is somebody who is extremely education friendly. She is a friend to teachers and just this incredible leader. I am fascinated every time I attend any of these sessions. And just so for you to know, those meetings, those consultations, they happen 3 times a year. They don't happen frequently unless it's ad hoc via email, which sometimes we do. And so, yes, we are consulted. I think OECTA is at present, the only teachers union there. And so it's really fortunate that we carry any influence on any decisions, but we have stakeholders from all over the province. It's certainly not just me contributing to these pieces. And a part of that policy or those digital charters, the IPC was always adamant about the protection of students, but it's only getting better as it evolves, right? But again, these charters, and I guess this is the piece that I keep going back and forth about, and I understand, but they're all voluntary. They're voluntary to sign on to. And as glorious as the idea is too, they're not policy. They're not things that you would mandate, rather they're things that you would aspire to, right? So there's only good in that, but at the same time you don't want organizations to haphazardly sign on to something so that they could present it as a badge of honor. So that continues to grow. I thank the IPC every time I get a chance. It's wonderful to have an organization that's that dedicated to the protection of student safety. If you go to their website, Patricia Kosheim, the commissioner herself, wrote a paragraph specifically to the students of Ontario, the children of Ontario, and said, fight for your privacy, defend yourselves, ask for better. It's fantastic. It's a great organization to work with, and in the limited touches that I do get with them for the 5 or 6 hours a day that we spend together, it fills the bucket, and you get to make connections with other stakeholders as well. And so I'm happy for that relationship, and I'm happy for the documentation that they publish. And we do at OECTA invite them to all of our events to have a booth so that all teachers can have access to their materials all the time.
That's amazing work. And I think it's such a powerful alignment because school leaders aren't necessarily experts in data and privacy and security, right? So having the arm and the organizations that really represent those ideas and those concerns being friendly towards schools and their issues and their considerations, it's powerful. It's a powerful resource and a powerful relationship for sure.
What I learned about them, Kristy, and sorry to jump in, because this is something I learned too, is they are the regulator, but they cannot regulate unless there is law. And so the law must be passed first for any regulations to be written. And so it's very important for everybody to know that as the government makes its decisions to create laws, only then would the privacy commissioner have the ability to create regulations to enforce those laws, right? So we have to work as a body, as voters, to ensure that our government is creating laws that protect everybody so that the regulator can then create the tools to enforce that protection. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's a really helpful point of clarity for us and for our listeners, Anthony. Thank you. Stephanie, if it's okay with you, I think we've circled around teacher concerns, system concerns. In the spirit of our podcast, we are really bridging the gap between school and home. And so I want to shift for a second to representing and bringing forth parent voice and concern. I have the privilege of being connected with a number of advocacy groups, including the Phone Free Schools Movement Canada, Skills Before Screens, and the Unplugged Movement, all of whom are doing tremendous work to try to advocate for the rights of their children and children at large in the province and the country when it comes to a wholesome and safe education. And so a burning question that I wanted to bring forth, representative of that parent community this morning, Anthony, is around consent. Parental consent when it comes to tech rollouts. So specifically, they've asked, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child stipulates that children and youth have the right to privacy and to education. Yet, the automatic creation of school accounts for children without an option to opt out has become the norm in many school boards. Children are asked to surrender personal information and accept privacy risks and consequences to participate in public education. Children are entered into digital systems they didn't choose for purposes they don't understand, with consequences that may follow them long after their public education ends. So where does informed consent or the age of consent factor into these digital ecosystems? And to what extent are schools failing to uphold the rights of their students?
So what educators in the public service or any educator around the world need more than ever are parents to continue their advocacy for children's rights. And because unless there's outside pressure on a system, we can only change what we can change from within. But the power of advocacy on the outside of the system is immeasurable. It's very influential. And so when reports are released or studies are conducted or statements are made and published in media, all of these things really fuel the fire for change. And so regulation and the protection of our students' privacy and talking about consent, all of that has to come from those advocacy groups that you just mentioned, which is incredibly impressive. But they have to take up that mantle. And what I would imagine is, because our work is different and yet we're all going towards a very similar goal, is somewhere in the future we meet in the middle. So I would encourage those groups to continue the work and to know that it's wanted. It's wanted work. So from the voices from the inside to let them know, continue to push and we'll meet you on the other side. And maybe we can find a path together through this.
That message is powerful beyond words, Anthony, and I'm very grateful. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask Anthony, is there anything that you'd like to share with us today about the work that you're doing that you didn't have yet the chance to share with us?
In the context of what our work here as a union, what we're doing is we're rolling out now a network of presenters. We have 20 new presenters that I've trained personally. They're going to be running a session once a week from October to April for Catholic teachers in Ontario, entitled What Teachers Need to Know About AI. They attended a 2-day workshop in Toronto and then subsequently attended several of my sessions so that they could become acclimated to the material. These are like-minded teachers. These are teachers who, like you, the alarm bells going off, needing answers and also needing to hear voices that sounded like theirs because that marketing machine was so powerful for them. So that's super exciting. I will continue to do my talks around the province, focusing on leadership and focusing on policy and focusing on protection. of the teachers. As I mentioned earlier, I'm hoping that the book will come out in time to be distributed at our conferences and then sold to members or sent to members. All the funds and proceeds go from that book will go to charity of OECTA's choosing. Our goal really is to continue to get the word out and to bring everybody to a baseline understanding of what it is, where it can be going, and how we can change the trajectory, right? And that's really important. It's not all doom. It really is about we have to arm ourselves with enough information to proceed. I think this next year is really pivotal. It's very important because we've seen the aggression of how companies are trying to enter into the tech world. And this fall into the spring is really the time for teachers to stand firm and decide how they want this to play out. And I think our role, and especially a huge thank you to the both of you for giving me this opportunity. You're both so learned, you're both so open to learning, and you're incredibly professional and very inspiring. You hearten me because it sometimes is a lonely road, and it's really important for us to find one another on this journey to amplify the work that we're trying to do. Education will evolve. It will become better. Our students will become more successful. But let's do it the right way. And let's do that before anybody comes to any harm.
Anthony, thank you so much for that and for everything that you've shared today. I am so grateful. You bring so much knowledge and insight to the topic, and the passion you bring to the discussion as well is so appreciated. And you've certainly given us a lot to think about. I know for me, a personal takeaway is this idea of balance between progress and safety. That is something that I think will continue to shape how I encounter technology and specifically AI with my own family, with my own students, with the people that I encounter. I think it is such a great way to bring us back to the roots of what it means to be human and what it means to build relationships and what it means to connect and be with one another. I think it's so beautiful. And I do want to go back to that story of the little boy. And you said, when I worked as an EA, I was there to help him. And I wanted to use technology in a way to help, to eliminate the gap and not to, eliminate flaws. It was equity driven. And I think that for me is so important as a takeaway as well. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
I'm so incredibly inspired for myself, Anthony, and there will be so much wisdom I'll still sort of be unpacking in the days to come from everything you shared this morning. And the collective action message, I think, is so resonant as well about the importance of us coming together, looking at what brought us to teaching in the first place and pulling together those necessary voices, right, to advocate for what education ought to be. So grateful. And for parents, this is a reminder that education does not stop at the classroom door. Thank you for bridging the gap with us today as we translate the research for your kitchen table. The conference is over for now, but the dialogue is just beginning, and we'll see you in the next one.